Sarah Mitchell stepped off the Greyhound bus at the small military town of Fort Riverside, her worn duffel bag slung over her shoulder. The dusty streets and faded storefronts reminded her of countless other towns she'd passed through during her years of service. At 28, she carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had seen more than her share of the world's darker corners. She wasn't supposed to be here. This was meant to be a simple stopover on her way to visit her sister in California, but her bus had broken down, and the next one wouldn't arrive until tomorrow morning. The mechanic at the local garage had shrugged and suggested she find a place to stay the night. Sarah had nodded, unsurprised by the delay. In her experience, plans rarely survived contact with reality. What the mechanic didn't know, and what nobody in this sleepy town could guess, was that Sarah Mitchell was a decorated Navy SEAL. She had completed 3 tours in Afghanistan, earned a Bronze Star for valor, and could take down an armed opponent in under 10 seconds. But right now, she just looked like another tired traveler in jeans and a plain t-shirt, trying to find a cheap motel for the night. The local military academy, Riverside Military Institute, sat on the hill overlooking the town. It was one of those prestigious prep schools where wealthy families sent their sons to learn discipline and leadership before heading off to elite universities or military careers. The academy had a reputation for producing future generals and politicians, though the current crop of cadets seemed more interested in proving their toughness than learning actual leadership. Among these cadets was Marcus Webb, a senior whose father was a prominent defense contractor. Marcus had grown up hearing war stories from his father's military friends, and he believed he understood what real combat was like. He was tall, athletic, and carried himself with the swagger of someone who had never truly been tested. His followers included Jake Morrison, whose grandfather had been a Marine general, and Tyler Brooks, whose family owned half the businesses in town. The 3 young men had developed a reputation around the academy for their pranks and hazing rituals. They called it building character, but their instructors knew it was really about asserting dominance. The academy's administration tolerated their behavior because their families donated generously to the school, and the boys were careful never to cross any lines that would bring serious consequences. That evening, as Sarah walked down Main Street looking for the Riverside Inn, she had no idea that Marcus and his friends were planning their biggest prank yet. They had heard rumors about a new female cadet who was supposed to arrive that week, someone whose father had pulled strings to get her admitted despite the academy's traditional male-only policy. The rumor mill suggested she was some senator's daughter who thought she could handle military life. "She probably thinks this is going to be like summer camp," Marcus had said earlier that day as the 3 sat in his room, plotting. "Rich daddy's girl who's never had to work for anything in her life." Jake nodded eagerly. "We should show her what real military training looks like. Give her a taste of what she's signed up for." Tyler, ever the strategist, had suggested they grab her when she arrived in town, before she even made it to the academy. A little impromptu survival training in the woods. See if she's really cut out for this life. They had no photos of the new cadet, just a description. Brunette, medium height, athletic build, probably carrying military-style gear. When they spotted Sarah walking down the street with her duffel bag, they were convinced they had found their target. Sarah was examining the faded sign of the Riverside Inn when she heard footsteps behind her. Years of combat experience had honed her instincts to a razor's edge. She sensed the approach of 3 people moving with purpose, trying to be quiet but failing. Without turning around, she shifted her weight slightly, preparing for whatever might come. "Excuse me, miss," came a voice that tried to sound authoritative but mostly managed to sound young and nervous. "Are you looking for the military academy?" Sarah turned slowly, taking in the 3 young men in cadet uniforms. They were trying to look imposing, but she could read their body language like an open book. The leader was overconfident. The one on the left was excited and eager, and the one on the right was nervous but trying to hide it. None of them had the bearing of someone who had seen real combat. "I'm just looking for a place to stay the night," Sarah replied calmly. "My bus broke down." Marcus exchanged a glance with his companions. This was perfect. The new cadet was trying to keep a low profile, probably hoping to scout out the town before reporting to the academy. They could use this to their advantage. "Actually, we're from the academy," Marcus said, stepping forward. "We were sent to escort you to campus. There's been a change of plans." Sarah's eyes narrowed slightly. Something felt off about this situation. These boys were too eager, too aggressive in their approach, but she decided to play along and see where this was headed. If they were legitimate academy representatives, she would apologize for the confusion and be on her way. If they weren't, well, that would be their problem. "I think there's been a mistake," she said. "I'm not going to the academy. I'm just passing through town." Jake stepped forward, his excitement barely contained. "Come on. We know who you are." "Your father called ahead. We're here to give you the full military experience, starting tonight." The pieces clicked into place for Sarah. These weren't official representatives. They were planning something. Probably some kind of hazing ritual they thought would be funny. She could have ended this immediately, shown them her military ID, and sent them running back to their dormitory, but something about their arrogant assumption that she was helpless annoyed her. "The full military experience?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. Tyler nodded enthusiastically. "Survival training, character building, the kind of stuff they don't teach in regular schools." Sarah almost smiled. These kids had no idea what they were walking into. She had spent years training some of the world's most elite soldiers. She had survived behind enemy lines, led rescue missions in hostile territory, and earned the respect of some of the toughest warriors in the military. But these three thought they were going to teach her about character. "All right," she said finally. "Show me what you've got." Marcus grinned, thinking he had successfully intimidated the new cadet into compliance. He gestured toward a military jeep parked nearby. "We'll drive you up to the training area. It's in the woods behind the academy." As they walked toward the vehicle, Sarah made mental notes of everything around her. The jeep was genuine military surplus, probably bought at auction. The boys were carrying basic camping gear, nothing sophisticated. This was clearly meant to be an overnight ordeal in the wilderness, probably involving cold temperatures, limited food, and various psychological pressure tactics. What they didn't realize was that Sarah had been through SARI training, the military's most intense survival, evasion, resistance, and escape program. She had endured interrogation techniques that would break most people, survived in hostile environments with nothing but her wits, and learned to thrive under conditions that would crush the average person. Whatever these boys had planned would seem like a vacation compared to what she had already experienced. During the drive up the winding road to the academy, Marcus kept glancing at her in the rearview mirror. She sat quietly, apparently calm, which he interpreted as either bravery or naivety. He couldn't decide which would make the evening more entertaining. "So," he said, trying to sound casual, "what made you want to come to a military academy?" "Most girls your age are thinking about college parties and sororities." Sarah looked out the window at the darkening forest. "I guess I wanted to challenge myself. See what I'm really made of." Jake laughed. "Well, you're definitely going to find that out tonight." They drove past the main academy buildings, their windows glowing warmly in the evening light. Sarah could see other cadets moving around the campus, probably heading to dinner or study hall. These three were clearly operating without official authorization, which made their little adventure technically a kidnapping, though Sarah doubted they had thought that far ahead. The jeep eventually turned onto a dirt road that led deeper into the forest. After another 10 minutes of bouncing over ruts and rocks, they reached a small clearing surrounded by dense woods. Marcus parked the vehicle and turned off the engine. "Welcome to your first night of real military training," he announced, getting out of the jeep with theatrical flair. Sarah stepped out and surveyed the area. It was a decent location for what they had in mind, isolated enough that no one would hear anything, but close enough to civilization that they wouldn't actually be in any danger. There was a fire ring in the center of the clearing, evidence that this spot had been used before. Tyler began unloading gear from the back of the jeep while Jake started gathering firewood. Marcus stood with his hands on his hips, clearly enjoying his role as the commanding officer of this operation. "Here's how this is going to work," he said to Sarah. "You're going to spend the night out here with minimal equipment. We'll test your survival skills, your mental toughness, your ability to handle pressure. Think of it as an accelerated version of what you would learn over your first year at the academy." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "And what happens if I pass your tests?" "Then maybe you'll earn our respect," Marcus replied. "And maybe we'll put in a good word for you with the instructors." "And if I fail?" Marcus shrugged. "Then you'll learn that military life isn't a game. Maybe you'll decide to transfer to a nice liberal arts college where things are easier." What none of them noticed was how Sarah was positioning herself during this conversation. She had unconsciously placed herself where she could see all three of them while keeping her back to open ground. Her weight was balanced, her hands loose at her sides. Every instinct honed by years of combat training was quietly assessing threats and preparing responses. As the evening progressed and the three cadets revealed more of their plan, Sarah began to understand exactly what kind of night they had in mind. They wanted to break her down psychologically, make her beg to be taken back to town, prove that she didn't belong in their world. It was a classic bullying scenario dressed up as military training. What they were about to discover was that they had chosen the wrong person for their game. Sarah Mitchell had faced down-armed terrorists, survived torture, and led men through combat zones where the slightest mistake meant death. Three spoiled academy boys with their amateur intimidation tactics were about to receive an education they would never forget. The fire crackled to life in the center of the clearing, casting dancing shadows on the surrounding trees. As darkness fell around them, the real test was about to begin. But it wouldn't be Sarah Mitchell who was tested. It would be three young men who were about to learn the difference between playing soldier and being one. The fire illuminated the clearing with an orange glow as Marcus began explaining the rules of their impromptu training exercise. Sarah sat on a fallen log, appearing to listen intently while actually cataloging every detail of her surroundings. The three cadets had no idea they were being studied by someone trained in tactical assessment. First exercise is basic survival, Marcus announced, pulling a small survival kit from his backpack. You get a knife, a length of rope, and a single match. You need to build a shelter, find water, and start a fire to cook your dinner. He held up a can of beans. This is all the food you get until morning. Jake smirked from across the fire. Most people panic when they realize how hard it really is. The wilderness doesn't care about your feelings or your daddy's money. Sarah accepted the meager supplies with a nod. The knife was a basic hunting blade, decent quality but nothing special. The rope was about 20 feet of standard utility cord. The match would be easy enough to use, though she could start a fire without it if necessary. "How long do I have?" she asked. 2 hours, Tyler said, checking his expensive watch. That's generous, really. In real combat situations, you might only have minutes to establish a defensive position. Sarah almost laughed. These boys were playing at being instructors while having no real understanding of what they were teaching. 2 hours was an eternity for someone with her training. She could build a serviceable shelter and have a meal cooking in 30 minutes. "What happens if I finish early?" she asked innocently. Marcus exchanged a glance with his friends. They clearly hadn't expected that question. "Then you wait. Military life is about following orders and staying disciplined even when you're ahead of schedule." "Makes sense," Sarah agreed. She stood up and stretched, rolling her shoulders as if working out kinks from the long bus ride. In reality, she was loosening up muscles that might need to move quickly. "Where should I set up?" Tyler gestured toward the darker edge of the clearing. "Over there, far enough from our fire that you can't cheat by using our warmth." As Sarah walked toward her assigned area, she heard Jake whisper to the others. "Think she'll cry?" "I bet she starts crying within the first hour." $20 says she begs to go back to town before midnight," Marcus whispered back. Sarah smiled in the darkness. These kids had obviously done this before, probably to younger students or anyone they perceived as weak. They had their little routine planned out, complete with escalating psychological pressure designed to break down their victim's confidence. What they didn't realize was that they were dealing with someone who had been through psychological operations, training both as a student and as an instructor. She began her work by gathering materials. The boys watched from their comfortable seats around the fire, waiting for signs of panic or frustration. Instead, they saw her moving efficiently through the underbrush, selecting branches and debris with obvious purpose. "She seems to know what she's doing," Tyler observed quietly. "Beginner's luck," Marcus replied, though he was starting to feel less confident about their plan. "Wait until things get difficult." Sarah had identified a natural windbreak formed by 2 fallen trees. She used the knife to cut smaller branches and began weaving them together with the rope, creating a framework that would shed rain and block wind from 3 sides. Her movements were quick and precise, with no wasted motion. Within 20 minutes, she had constructed a lean-to shelter that would have impressed a survival instructor. She gathered dry moss and leaves for insulation, arranged stones to reflect heat from a fire, and even dug a small drainage channel to direct water away from her sleeping area. The three cadets watched in growing silence as their victim demonstrated skills they had never seen before. When she started her fire using the single match and had it blazing efficiently within minutes, Jake actually stood up to get a better look. "How did she do that so fast?" he whispered to Marcus. Marcus was frowning now. This wasn't going according to plan. The new cadet was supposed to be struggling, getting frustrated, maybe cutting herself with the unfamiliar knife or failing to start a fire. Instead, she was performing like someone with extensive wilderness experience. Sarah opened the can of beans with her knife and began heating them over her fire. She had improvised a pot from birch bark, demonstrating a level of bushcraft knowledge that most people would never learn. As she worked, she hummed quietly to herself, clearly comfortable in her environment. "Phase 2, Marcus announced loudly, trying to regain control of the situation. "Time for some character building." He walked over to where Sarah was tending her meal, his two friends flanking him in what they probably thought was an intimidating formation. Sarah looked up from her improvised cooking setup with mild interest. "The thing about military life," Marcus began in his best authoritative voice, "is that you can't always count on having time to eat. Sometimes the mission comes first, and personal comfort comes second." Before Sarah could respond, Jake stepped forward and deliberately kicked dirt onto her fire, scattering sparks and contaminating her food. Tyler grabbed the can of beans and threw it into the woods. "Oops," Jake said with mock innocence. "Looks like you'll be going hungry tonight. Better get used to it." This was clearly part of their planned escalation. They were taking away her basic necessities to create stress and dependency. Sarah watched her scattered fire for a moment, then looked up at the three young men standing over her. "I see," she said calmly. "So this is how you teach leadership? By destroying other people's work?" Marcus crossed his arms. "This is how we teach that life isn't fair, that you can't always control your circumstances, that sometimes you have to deal with setbacks and keep going." Sarah stood up slowly, brushing dirt off her jeans. The boys tensed slightly, perhaps expecting tears or angry protests. Instead, she nodded thoughtfully. "That's actually a valuable lesson," she said. "Mind if I demonstrate how a real soldier handles setbacks?" Before any of them could respond, Sarah moved with the fluid speed of a trained fighter. She stepped inside Marcus's reach, swept his legs, and had him flat on his back before he could react. The entire movement took less than 2 seconds. Jake started forward to help his friend, but found himself facing someone who had shifted into a completely different mode. Sarah's casual demeanor had been replaced by the focused intensity of a professional warrior. Her stance was balanced, her hands ready, her eyes alert to every movement. "I wouldn't," she said quietly. "Your friend isn't hurt, just surprised. Let's keep it that way." Tyler helped Marcus to his feet. The senior cadet's face was red with embarrassment and growing anger. "What the hell was that?" he demanded. "A demonstration," Sarah replied. "You wanted to teach me about handling setbacks. I thought I'd show you how someone with actual training deals with unexpected situations." She walked to the edge of the woods and returned within minutes carrying the can of beans which she had tracked by sound when Tyler threw it. She also brought back a handful of wild edibles she had spotted earlier, including some nuts and berries. "The difference between a soldier and someone playing dress-up," she said as she rebuilt her fire with practiced efficiency, "is that a real soldier adapts and overcomes. They don't just endure hardship, they find ways to succeed despite it." The three cadets watched in stunned silence as she not only restored her meal but improved on it. Her new fire was burning more efficiently than before, and she had found additional food sources that they hadn't even known existed. Marcus was struggling with a mixture of humiliation and confusion. This wasn't the helpless victim they had expected to torment. This woman was demonstrating capabilities that exceeded anything they had learned at the academy. "Where did you learn to do that?" Tyler asked, his earlier bravado replaced by genuine curiosity. Sarah looked up from her cooking. "Do what? Start a fire? Find food? That's basic survival training. I thought you boys were supposed to be teaching me military skills." Jake was still processing what he had seen. "That move you used on Marcus. That wasn't basic anything. Hand-to-hand combat is part of military training too, Sarah said casually. Though I suppose they might not teach that at your academy. Too dangerous for the students. The insult was delivered so mildly that it took a moment to register. When it did, Marcus felt his anger flare again. These prep school kids were used to being treated with deference because of their family names and future prospects. Having someone dismiss them as inadequate was not something they knew how to handle. You think you're pretty tough, Marcus said, his voice tight with controlled anger. Let's see how tough you are when things really get difficult. He gestured to his friends, and they moved to surround Sarah again. But this time, their body language was different. The playful intimidation had been replaced by real aggression. They were no longer trying to scare a helpless victim. They were reacting to a perceived threat to their status and authority. Sarah finished preparing her meal and began eating, apparently unconcerned by the three young men looming over her. I'm listening, she said between bites. What did you have in mind? Tyler spoke up, his voice harder now. Phase 3 of training, combat readiness. Sometimes soldiers have to fight when they're outnumbered, when the odds are against them. That's true, Sarah agreed. It happens more often than most people realize. The key is understanding your advantages and using them effectively. Jake laughed harshly. What advantages? There are 3 of us and 1 of you. We're bigger, stronger, and we have the home field advantage. Sarah set down her improvised bowl and wiped her hands on her jeans. When she looked up at them, her expression had changed again. The mild amusement was gone, replaced by something that made all 3 boys take an unconscious step backward. You're assuming those are the only factors that matter in a fight, she said quietly. You're also assuming that I see this as a disadvantage rather than an opportunity. Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cooling night air. There was something in her voice, something in the way she was looking at them, that suggested they had made a serious miscalculation. An opportunity for what? He asked, trying to maintain his authoritative tone. Sarah smiled. But it wasn't a friendly expression. To teach 3 boys the difference between playing soldier and being one. To show you what real military training looks like. To give you a demonstration that you'll remember for the rest of your lives. She stood up and began walking toward them with slow, deliberate steps. The 3 cadets found themselves backing away without consciously deciding to retreat. See? Here's what you didn't understand about your little game, Sarah continued, her voice conversational but somehow menacing. You thought you were the predators and I was the prey. You thought you could intimidate me, break me down, make me beg for mercy. She stopped walking when they reached the center of the clearing, near their original campfire. The flames cast shifting shadows across her face, highlighting the absolute confidence in her expression. But you made one crucial error in your tactical assessment, she said. You assumed I was who you thought I was, instead of finding out who I actually am. Marcus tried to rally his courage and authority. Look, maybe we got a little carried away, but this was just supposed to be fun. A little hazing, nothing serious. Hazing? Sarah repeated thoughtfully. Is that what you call kidnapping? Destruction of property? Assault? Because that's what you've actually done tonight. The 3 young men exchanged nervous glances. They hadn't thought about the legal implications of their actions. They were used to operating within the protected environment of the academy, where their family connections insulated them from serious consequences. We didn't kidnap anybody, Tyler protested. We just offered you a ride, under false pretenses, Sarah pointed out. After I specifically told you I wasn't going to the academy. Then you brought me to an isolated location against my will. Jake was beginning to understand that their fun evening might have serious repercussions. We can take you back to town right now. No harm done. Sarah shook her head. Oh, but there has been harm done. You've made several serious mistakes tonight, and you're going to learn from them. Consider this a more advanced form of military education than anything you'll get in your classrooms. She began to circle them slowly, and the 3 boys found themselves turning to keep her in sight. Without realizing it, they had become the ones feeling hunted. First lesson, Sarah said as she moved. Know your enemy. You assumed I was a helpless civilian because I'm a woman traveling alone. You never considered that I might have training, experience, or capabilities beyond your understanding. Marcus was beginning to feel genuinely frightened, though he was trying not to show it. What kind of training? He asked. Sarah's smile became even less friendly. The kind that makes 3 amateur soldiers with delusions of grandeur look like exactly what they are, children playing games they don't understand. The night was about to become much more educational than any of them had anticipated. The atmosphere in the clearing had shifted completely. What had started as the 3 cadets' planned intimidation exercise had become something far more serious. Sarah continued her slow circle around them, and with each step, the boys felt more like cornered prey than commanding officers. Second lesson, Sarah continued, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had commanded real soldiers in life-and-death situations. Tactical awareness. You brought me to an isolated location, which you thought gave you an advantage, but isolation works both ways. No one can hear you scream for help either. Tyler swallowed hard. Are you threatening us? I'm educating you, Sarah replied, the same way you thought you were educating me. The difference is that my lessons are based on actual military experience, not fantasies about what military life is like. She stopped walking and faced them directly. In the firelight, her stance was unmistakably that of a trained fighter. Her weight was balanced, her hands loose and ready, her eyes alert to every movement they made. Marcus tried to assert control over the situation. Look, this has gone far enough. We're going to head back to the academy now, and we'll pretend this whole thing never happened. No, Sarah said simply. We're not done with your education yet. You wanted to teach me about military discipline and character. Now I'm going to teach you about the real thing. She gestured toward their camping gear. Drop your packs. Empty your pockets. Everything on the ground. Jake laughed nervously. You can't be serious. You're outnumbered 3-1. Sarah tilted her head slightly. Am I? Let's test that theory. Jake Morrison, right? Grandfather was a Marine general. You've heard stories your whole life about combat, but you've never actually been in a real fight. Your biggest challenge so far has been getting through algebra. Jake's mouth fell open. How do you know my name? Who told you about my grandfather? Tyler Brooks, Sarah continued, turning to the third boy. Family owns half the businesses in town. You think money and connections will protect you from everything. You've never had to face real consequences for your actions. Tyler was backing away now. This is insane. How could you possibly know who we are? Sarah's smile was cold. And Marcus Webb. Daddy's a defense contractor who tells war stories at dinner parties. You think listening to those stories makes you understand combat. You have no idea what it's really like to have someone trying to kill you. Marcus felt ice forming in his stomach. This woman knew things about them that she couldn't possibly know unless she had done research, which meant this encounter wasn't as random as it appeared. Third lesson, Sarah said. Intelligence gathering. A real soldier learns everything possible about their environment and potential threats before taking action. You 3 have been pulling this stunt for months, haven't you? Taking students into the woods, breaking them down, making them feel weak and helpless. The 3 boys exchanged guilty glances. They had indeed done this before, though never with someone who had turned the tables so completely. Tommy Patterson last month, Sarah continued. 15-year-old kid whose parents sent him to the academy because he was getting bullied at public school. You 3 took him out here, destroyed his confidence, made him so scared he tried to quit school. Jake was backing away faster now. How could you possibly know about that? Because Tommy Patterson is my nephew, Sarah said quietly. And when he called his aunt crying about what 3 older boys had done to him, I decided to pay a visit to your little academy. The revelation hit them like a physical blow. This hadn't been a random encounter. This woman had come here specifically to find them, and they had walked right into her trap. Marcus tried to run. He made it 3 steps before Sarah moved with the lightning speed she had demonstrated earlier. She caught him easily, using his own momentum to send him sprawling face first into the dirt. Tyler and Jake started to run in opposite directions, but Sarah had positioned herself perfectly to intercept them. She caught Tyler with a sweep kick that sent him tumbling, then pivoted to grab Jake's shirt as he tried to sprint past her. Within 10 seconds, all 3 cadets were on the ground, breathing hard and staring up at a woman who had just demonstrated capabilities far beyond anything they had imagined possible. Fourth lesson, Sarah said, not even breathing hard despite having just taken down 3 opponents. Speed and precision beat size and numbers, every time. She walked over to their abandoned backpacks and began examining their contents. Energy bars, bottled water, sleeping bags, and what appeared to be a collection of psychological torture devices. Blindfolds, zip ties, and a small air horn probably used to wake victims at random intervals. Impressive collection, she said, holding up the zip ties. Planning to restrain someone who didn't want to participate in your games? That's called kidnapping and false imprisonment. Federal crimes. Marcus struggled to his feet, his face dirty, and his confidence shattered. We never actually tied anyone up. We just used them to scare people. The same way you just used them to scare my nephew, Sarah replied. A 15-year-old boy who trusted you because you wore uniforms and claimed to represent military values. She pulled out her phone and began taking pictures of their equipment. The boys watched in growing horror as she documented everything they had brought. "What are you doing?" Tyler asked. "Evidence collection," Sarah said matter-of-factly. "Standard procedure when investigating criminal activity." Jake was close to panic now. "You can't report this. We'll get expelled. Our families will find out." Sarah looked at him with cold eyes. "The same way Tommy's family found out what you did to him. The same way all your other victims' families should have found out." She continued her methodical documentation, photographing their faces, their equipment, and the clearing where they had brought their victims. The 3 boys sat in defeated silence, finally understanding the magnitude of their situation. Fifth lesson, Sarah said as she worked. Actions have consequences. You've been operating under the assumption that your family names and money would protect you from accountability. Tonight, you're learning that protection has limits. Marcus tried one last desperate appeal. "Look, we're sorry about what happened to your nephew. We were just trying to build character, teach some life lessons. We never meant to hurt anybody." Sarah stopped photographing and looked at him directly. "Build character? You destroyed a child's confidence. You made him afraid to trust people in authority. You caused psychological damage that he's still recovering from." "We didn't know he was your nephew," Tyler said weakly. "Would it have mattered if he wasn't?" Sarah asked. "Does someone need to be related to a Navy SEAL to deserve protection from bullies?" The words hit them like a bomb. Navy SEAL. Suddenly everything made sense. Her combat skills, her survival expertise, her complete lack of fear when facing 3 opponents. "You're military," Jake whispered. "Was," Sarah corrected. 3 tours in Afghanistan. Bronze Star for Valor. I've seen actual combat, faced real enemies, made life-and-death decisions under fire. And you 3 thought you could intimidate me with camping trips and psychology games." She pulled something from her pocket and tossed it to Marcus. It was a military challenge coin, the kind given to honor exceptional service. Marcus turned it over in his hands, seeing the Navy SEAL trident embossed on one side. "That's what real military service looks like," Sarah said. "Not playing dress-up and picking on children." The 3 boys sat in stunned silence, finally understanding the magnitude of their mistake. They had tried to prey on someone they thought was helpless, only to discover they had targeted one of the most dangerous individuals they could have encountered. Sixth lesson, Sarah continued. Know when you're outmatched. You boys have been playing soldier for so long that you forgot there's a difference between wearing a uniform and earning one. She began gathering their equipment, systematically disabling their ability to continue their harassment campaigns. The zip ties went into her pack. The air horn followed. She scattered their food supplies and poured water on their sleeping bags. What are you doing? Marcus protested. You can't just take our stuff. I'm confiscating evidence, Sarah replied, and ensuring you can't use these items to victimize anyone else. Tyler was crying now, the reality of their situation finally sinking in. Please don't report this. We'll do anything you want. We'll never bother anyone again. Sarah studied him for a moment. The same promise you would have made to any adult who caught you tormenting my nephew. How can I trust people who lie as easily as they breathe? She pulled out her phone again and began making a call. The boys listened in growing despair as she spoke to someone on the other end. Colonel Martinez? This is Sarah Mitchell. I need to report an incident involving 3 of your cadets. Yes, sir, I'm certain. I have photographic evidence and witness testimony. Marcus tried to interrupt. Wait, please don't. Sarah held up a hand for silence and continued her call. Marcus Webb, Tyler Brooks, and Jake Morrison. Yes, sir. Those are the correct names. They've been conducting unauthorized hazing operations off campus. The conversation continued for several minutes while the 3 boys sat in horrified silence. When Sarah finally hung up, they looked at her with desperate hope that some compromise might still be possible. 7th lesson, Sarah said, pocketing her phone. Military justice is different from civilian justice. Colonel Martinez takes a very dim view of cadets who bring dishonor to his academy, especially when those cadets prey on younger students. Jake was sobbing now. Our families are going to kill us. Do you know what this will do to our futures? Sarah's expression didn't soften. The same thing you tried to do to Tommy's future. The same thing you've done to every student you've terrorized. The difference is that they didn't deserve what you did to them. The sound of vehicles approaching echoed through the forest. Sarah had given precise coordinates during her phone call, and the academy's security team had responded with military efficiency. Final lesson, Sarah said as headlights began to illuminate the clearing. Real soldiers protect those who can't protect themselves. They don't exploit the vulnerable for entertainment. The vehicle stopped, and Colonel Martinez stepped out with a team of military police. His face was grim as he surveyed the scene. 3 disheveled cadets sitting in the dirt, and a composed woman who looked like she had just finished a routine training exercise. Miss Mitchell, the colonel said with a respectful nod. Thank you for bringing this to our attention. Thank you for responding so quickly, Colonel. Sarah replied, I believe these young men have learned some valuable lessons tonight about the difference between real military service and playing games. As the MPs began processing the 3 cadets, Sarah gathered her things and prepared to leave. The boys would face military discipline, possible expulsion, and criminal charges for their actions. More importantly, they would never again be in a position to terrorize helpless victims. Tommy Patterson would finally get the justice he deserved, and other potential victims would be protected from these predators. It had been an educational evening for everyone involved, though not in the way the 3 cadets had originally planned. 3 weeks later, Sarah sat in Colonel Martinez's office at Riverside Military Academy, reviewing the final reports from the investigation. The morning sun streamed through tall windows, illuminating certificates and commendations that decorated the walls. The colonel had invited her to see how the situation had been resolved. The Board of Inquiry concluded their investigation yesterday, Colonel Martinez said, sliding a thick folder across his desk. All 3 cadets have been expelled from the academy. Marcus Webb and Tyler Brooks are facing criminal charges for kidnapping and assault. Jake Morrison will likely receive probation due to his cooperation with the investigation. Sarah nodded, scanning through the official documents. The academy had conducted a thorough investigation once they understood the scope of the problem. What they discovered was far worse than anyone had initially suspected. How many other victims did you find? She asked. 17 confirmed cases over the past 2 years, the colonel replied grimly. Webb and his group had been systematically targeting younger students, exchange students, and anyone they perceived as vulnerable. Your nephew was just the most recent victim. The investigation had revealed a pattern of abuse that went far beyond simple hazing. The 3 boys had developed increasingly sophisticated methods of psychological torture, always careful to avoid leaving physical evidence. They had convinced their victims that reporting the incidents would only make things worse, creating a climate of fear that had protected their activities. The other families have been notified, Colonel Martinez continued. Several are pursuing civil lawsuits against the Webb and Brooks families. The Morrison family has agreed to pay for counseling services for all the victims. Sarah felt a grim satisfaction. Justice was finally being served, though it couldn't undo the damage that had been done to so many young people. At least future students would be protected from these predators. What about the academy's oversight procedures? She asked. How did this go undetected for so long? The colonel's expression darkened. That's the most disturbing part of this investigation. We discovered that several faculty members were aware of unusual student behavior, but failed to investigate properly. They've been suspended pending their own disciplinary hearings. He pulled out another file and opened it to reveal photographs of the equipment Sarah had confiscated that night in the woods. The sophistication of their operation was remarkable. They had developed detailed psychological profiles of potential victims, timing charts for when students would be most vulnerable, and escape routes planned for every location they used. Sarah studied the evidence photos. The three boys had indeed been running a sophisticated operation, more like a criminal enterprise than a student prank. They had been meticulous in their planning and ruthless in their execution. "There's something else you should know," Colonel Martinez said. "The FBI has taken an interest in this case. Apparently, Marcus Webb's activities caught their attention because of his father's defense contracts. They're investigating whether any classified information might have been compromised." This was a development Sarah hadn't expected. Defense contractors were subject to strict security protocols, and any criminal activity by their family members could trigger federal investigations. "How is Tommy handling all of this?" the colonel asked. Sarah smiled for the first time during their meeting. "Better than I expected. Knowing that his attackers are being held accountable has helped him regain some of his confidence. He's actually talking about applying to a different military academy when he's older. I'd be happy to provide a recommendation when the time comes," Colonel Martinez offered. "We've implemented new protocols to prevent this kind of abuse. Anonymous reporting systems, regular psychological evaluations for students, and mandatory training for all faculty on recognizing signs of harassment. The academy was clearly taking the incident seriously, implementing systemic changes to ensure nothing like this could happen again." Sarah appreciated their thorough response, though she knew the real test would be whether these changes lasted beyond the immediate crisis. A knock on the door interrupted their conversation. Colonel Martinez's aide entered and announced that several people were waiting to speak with Sarah. "The victims' families," the colonel explained. "They've been asking to meet the person who finally exposed what was happening to their children." Sarah followed him to a larger conference room, where 15 adults sat around a polished table. Their faces showed a mixture of gratitude, anger, and relief. These were parents who had watched their children suffer and hadn't known how to help. "Mitchell," said a woman Sarah recognized as Mrs. Patterson, Tommy's mother. "We can't thank you enough for what you did. Our children have been living in fear for months, and we didn't even know why." A man Sarah didn't recognize stood up and introduced himself as Dr. Chen, father of Kevin Chen, a 16-year-old exchange student from Taiwan. "My son became withdrawn and anxious after his first month here. We thought it was just homesickness. Now we know those boys were deliberately targeting him because of his accent and cultural differences." One by one, the parents shared their stories. Children who had become afraid to leave their dormitories. Students who had started failing classes because they couldn't concentrate. Young people who had lost their enthusiasm for activities they once loved. The psychological damage was extensive and systematic. "What I don't understand," said another parent, "is how 3 teenagers could have developed such sophisticated psychological torture techniques." Sarah had been wondering about that herself. During her investigation, she had discovered that Marcus Webb had been reading advanced psychology textbooks and studying interrogation manuals that his father had brought home from work. The boy had essentially trained himself in psychological warfare techniques. "They studied their craft," she explained to the group. "Marcus Webb had access to military and law enforcement training materials through his father's work. He taught the others what he learned. They approached their harassment campaign with the same systematic planning that professionals use for legitimate purposes." The revelation sent a chill through the room. These parents were realizing that their children had been victimized by someone who had deliberately studied how to cause maximum psychological damage. "Mrs. Patterson spoke up again. "The counselors say it could take months or even years for some of these children to fully recover. The damage goes beyond just feeling scared or embarrassed." Sarah nodded grimly. Psychological trauma can be more devastating than physical injuries, especially when it's inflicted by people in positions of authority. Your children trusted these older students because they wore uniforms and claimed to represent military values. Dr. Chen leaned forward. "How did you know to look for them?" Tommy's call to you happened weeks after the incident. Why did you decide to investigate personally instead of just reporting it to the academy? Sarah considered her answer carefully. I've seen what happens when institutional failures allow predators to operate unchecked. Sometimes the only way to stop them is to catch them in the act, with evidence so clear that denial becomes impossible. She had indeed planned her intervention carefully, using her military training to conduct reconnaissance and gather intelligence before taking action. She had researched the 3 boys, learned their patterns, and positioned herself where they would find her when they were ready to strike again. You used yourself as bait, another parent observed. I used my training and experience to create a situation where they would reveal their true nature, Sarah corrected. I knew they couldn't resist the opportunity to victimize someone they thought was helpless. Colonel Martinez rejoined the conversation. Miss Mitchell's intervention was perfectly legal under citizens' arrest statutes. She was protecting future victims and gathering evidence of ongoing criminal activity. The meeting continued for another hour as parents asked questions and shared their experiences. Many expressed guilt that they hadn't recognized what was happening to their children sooner. Others worried about long-term psychological effects and how to help their kids rebuild their confidence. Sarah provided what guidance she could, drawing on her experience with combat trauma and recovery. She emphasized that recovery was possible, but it required patience, professional support, and most importantly, justice being seen to be done. As the meeting ended, Tommy Patterson surprised everyone by entering the room. He had grown several inches since Sarah had last seen him, and his posture was more confident than she remembered. Aunt Sarah, he said, giving her a fierce hug. I wanted to thank you for believing me and for making sure they can't hurt anyone else. Sarah felt tears welling up in her eyes. This was why she had taken the risk, why she had put herself in danger. One frightened phone call from her nephew had triggered a chain of events that had ultimately protected 17 young people from further harm. You're braver than you know, she told him. It took courage to call me and even more courage to testify during the investigation. Tommy had indeed testified, providing detailed accounts of his ordeal that had helped establish the pattern of abuse. His testimony had been crucial in demonstrating that the 3 cadets' actions were deliberate and systematic rather than isolated incidents. Are you going to stay in town for a while? He asked. Sarah shook her head. I need to get back to my life. But I want you to know that I'm proud of you for speaking up. That's what real courage looks like. As she prepared to leave the academy for the final time, Colonel Martinez walked her to the main gate. The campus looked different to her now, knowing what had been happening in its shadows. But she also saw signs of positive change, new security protocols, additional counseling staff, and what appeared to be a more open atmosphere among the students. One more thing, the colonel said as they reached the gate. The academy would like to offer you a position as a civilian instructor. We could use someone with your expertise in training and protecting our students. Sarah considered the offer. It was tempting to stay and help rebuild the academy's culture, to ensure that the changes they were implementing would actually protect future students. But she also knew that her work here was done. Thank you for the offer, she said finally. But I think you have the tools you need now. The real test will be whether you use them consistently, even when the spotlight isn't on you. She walked away from Riverside Military Academy knowing that justice had been served, but also understanding that vigilance would always be necessary. Predators existed in every institution, and protecting the vulnerable required constant effort from people willing to stand up and take action. 3 months later, Sarah received a letter from Tommy. He had been accepted to a different military academy, one with an excellent reputation for leadership development and student protection. His confidence had returned, and he was excited about pursuing his dream of serving his country. Marcus Webb had been sentenced to 2 years in juvenile detention and would be required to register as a sex offender due to the psychological nature of his crimes. Tyler Brooks received 18 months and substantial financial penalties. Jake Morrison got probation and community service, but his family's business reputation had been permanently damaged by the scandal. More importantly, the 17 victims were all receiving professional counseling and support. Most were recovering well, though some would carry emotional scars for years to come. The lawsuits against the perpetrators' families had resulted in a substantial fund for continued psychological treatment and educational support. Sarah kept the letter from Tommy in her wallet as a reminder of why her military service had been worthwhile. She had spent years protecting her country from foreign enemies, but sometimes the most important battles were fought at home, protecting the innocent from those who would abuse their power. The case had attracted national attention and led to investigations at other military academies across the country. Several institutions had discovered their own problems and implemented reforms as a result. Sarah's intervention had created ripple effects that would protect countless young people she would never meet. As she continued her journey to visit her sister in California, Sarah reflected on the lessons of that night in the forest. The three cadets had thought they were teaching her about military life, but they had instead learned fundamental truths about justice, accountability, and the difference between real strength and the illusion of power. Sometimes the best way to honor military values was to use military skills to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. Sometimes justice required someone trained in combat to step out of the shadows and remind predators that they weren't as safe as they thought. The bus pulled into the next town, and Sarah looked out the window at another peaceful community. Somewhere in every place like this, there were vulnerable people who needed protection, and predators who counted on no one caring enough to stop them. Sarah Mitchell had learned long ago that freedom and safety weren't abstract concepts. They were daily choices made by individuals willing to stand up for what was right, even when it was difficult or dangerous. That night in the forest had been just one more battle in the endless war between those who protected and those who preyed. And like all the battles she had fought, it had been worth winning.